NWP Radio.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.
Hello and welcome to NWP Radio. This is a production of the National Writing Project, and I am Christina Cantrell. I am thrilled today to welcome our colleagues Nicole Mirra and Antero Garcia to the show today and to talk about their new book. I have to put my glasses on to read the title, Civics for the World to Come, Committing to Democracy in Every Classroom. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, in an attempt to slightly expand the ways we might think about democracy in this mix, as suggested by Nicole and Antero in their book, I wanted to acknowledge that I'm logging in here from Philadelphia, a city that is centered between two rivers, and it's also known as Lenapehoking, or the land of the Lenape people. Nicole and Antero, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourselves, tell us where you are, and then kick off a discussion about this book by telling us maybe a little bit about its origin story.
Thanks so much for having us, Christina. It's so good to see you virtually. And I am joining you from just a few blocks away from Christina in Philadelphia, in the land of Lenape, in South Philadelphia, where my family's from. And I am currently an associate professor at Rutgers University, formerly a high school teacher of literacy and debate in Brooklyn, New York, and Los Angeles, California, where I met Antero.
That's me. Hi, I'm Antero Garcia. I'm talking to you from Pasadena, but I work at Stanford University. I'm an associate professor, and Stanford is on the land of the Ohlone and Mwekma Ohlone people. And yeah, we first met too long ago as doctoral students at UCLA. And I think the origin story for this book has probably a couple of origin stories, right? So one is Nicole and I have both shared interests in English language arts, the most important subject area, as well as civics and the kind of intersection of these two spaces and thinking about civics across discipline areas. But I think we've also shared an ongoing interest in the ways that literature, that speculative kinds of imagination, that storytelling can shape society and can kind of fundamentally change the ways we might see the world around us or the worlds around us. And so I don't know, Nicole, if those might be two different kinds of origin stories to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's important that when we talk about works like this, this text that's living out in the world, is that like part of it is an origin story of our own like intellectual and like professional personal relationship. So because so much of this work is done in collaboration, I think that's really important. And then when it comes to the topic of the work around this intersection between civics and literacy and the idea of civics being a vehicle for building the world that we want and the world that our students deserve, I think the origin is really that the world is on fire. And I know that's not said to sound alarmist. We're literally dealing with mass human suffering. We're dealing with climate disaster. We're dealing with another mass shooting. I'm sure by the time this airs, that could be referring to many other different ones, which can sound very despairing. But I think that when we say that the world is on fire, like why this book now is that what is education for, if not to put out these burns and then think about what it means to rise from those ashes and build a new world? What else is education for, if not for that? And I think that for anyone that's listening that works with not only young people in the K-12 sense, but who work with any other human beings, you probably feel the same way that Antero and I do, which is that we are not okay. Perhaps we're getting through day to day. We have moments of joy, of course, but that generally we know that in schools right now and in all of our places in society, folks are struggling. We're struggling to remember what the purpose of going through our daily routines in work and school every day is. We're struggling to connect. This is something that predates the pandemic, but that was definitely exacerbated by the pandemic, is just reevaluating what we're doing when we are in public spaces together and what the world is that we want to live in, because we feel like the routines are not sufficient right now at all for the things that we know that our young people are dealing with, what they know that they're thinking about, and what they want, and the world that they deserve. So for us, this book was kind of an urgent call to action around thinking about what schooling is for and centering it on the idea of civics. Dr. Goldie Muhammad, one of our mentors and friends who was kind enough to read the book in its early stages, she commented that, civics is the future of education. And I think it's really powerful, this idea that it's really time to get back to basics about what we are seeking to do when we come together intergenerationally in schools, because the world as we know it is changing, and that education needs to have its primary purpose be doing something about it. So we wanted this to be a space that teachers could come to start this journey pragmatically, but urgently.
Thank you. And I do, in the book, you also refer to this as sort of an intergenerational project too, not just for teachers, but also like this is something that we all have to start to grapple with together. And you call for teachers themselves to be, that all teachers are civics teachers, and you make that argument that we're really all in this together as educators and as community members. And you do this and you lay out these sort of main principles that support this argument. I was wondering if you could sort of describe that to us and sort of walk us through that.
Yeah, I'll start off and then I'll throw it over to you, Antero, but I think, we tend to start most of our talks with this first principle, which kind of undergirds the entire book, which is that all teaching is political and all teachers are civics teachers. And we start at that point because it usually does kind of like create a little bit of cognitive dissonance for any of us that work in schools. And that includes me too. Antero makes the serious joke that ELA is the best subject area. But the reason we make that joke is that we started as English teachers and we worked in a school system in which, everyone is put in their little disciplinary boxes. I'm an English teacher. I am not a social studies teacher. I am not a math teacher. I am not a science teacher. That means that my job somehow ends at some kind of like point, and that civics somehow, because it lives in the social studies in most of the standards around the country, that somehow that's not my job. And we need to shake everyone out of the idea that civics is something that sits in a particular discipline. We want to embrace the idea that every choice we make in the classroom is a civic choice. The relationships we cultivate with students have civic choices to them, and they're also political choices. Political not in the sense necessarily of partisan Democrat Republican choices, but literally about value orientations, ethics, commitments about what kind of world we want our students to be living in and what knowledge and skills we think are important when they get there. So to us, it was very important to say this book is for everyone that works with young people, everyone that works with adults, anyone that has interactions that are like educative in nature is doing a civic act. And to us, that was really the way that we want to invite everyone into this conversation, and what we think is one of those ways to start building a new world in education. And the second one that Antero and I talk about, and Antero, I'll pass it to you, is this idea that this is not a morally relativist project. This is not helping to assimilate young people into the world as it is, that we need to demand just futures. And so, Antero, you can pick up on that one.
Yeah, I think I'll pick up on it, but I'm going to loop back around because that's a nice circuitous way to follow the conversation. And that is, I think, so every teacher is a civics teacher, but to your point, Nicole, of the boundaries of the subject areas that we teach in, I think oftentimes when people think of civics, right, they think of that history class where you learn about the 3 branches of government and the importance of voting. And that is not what we're talking. You should probably vote, but that's not what we're talking about here, right? That's not the fundamental role. And so when we talk about every teacher is a civics teacher, for us, civics is, and I think for what we're advocating for in classrooms, civics is about the ways that we live and engage with the world around us, right? And so your choice to not engage in current events in a classroom is offering powerful, profound civic lessons in classrooms all of the time, right? And so every kind of orientation, the ways you set up your classroom, the ways you allow students to socialize or not socialize, your uses of technology, the ways our students are surveilled in school, all of those are reinforcing particular kinds of civic values. And so as this other kind of commitment, right, we know that demanding justice means not sitting in the kind of the world is burning presentism that Nicole was talking about earlier, right? That the ways that we're moving forward means that this book and this current moment are birthed with it. This book is birthed in this current moment. And this current moment is pretty awful, right? For many, many people around this country and around the world. But we know, right, to the subtitle of the book, right, to the subtitle of the book, I'm forgetting our title for the book. This is great. That we're going to enter other kinds of worlds, right? We are in a particular kind of understanding of the world around us. And that in order to move forward, in order to step into a different kind of possibility, that requires not sitting passively with the kinds of expectations that are offered to schools, to teachers, and to students right now. That we know that there's better, And our opportunity now is to imagine what's that look like in our classroom in all of the different kinds of subject areas that we might be teaching right now.
Great, thank you. And then you take us to this third principle, which is really about world building, right? And so you write, we can interrogate and innovate our teaching by embracing world building commitments in the classroom. And then you offer this world building civics education framework along with, and then all the subsequent chapters walk us through that framework using case studies and guiding questions. So what is the role of world building in this work? I mean, you've talked about it, that we have to sort of rebuild, right? Where the ways that we engage with each other and create this world together. But what does that start to, how are you suggesting we go about that process?
Yeah, we kind of came up with these 5 commitments that we call them. They're not necessarily just skills. We think they're really like things that we need to ethically commit to. And then I'll pass it to Antero to talk a little bit about like the theoretical frameworks that we use to find these, to develop these 5 commitments in speculative art and literature and theory. But the 5 commitments that we're thinking about, and we kind of organize them around, it's circular. Our inquiry, which is really the essential question for that, is like starting off our education by asking, why are things this way? It's a fundamental question that reach across subject areas, across disciplines. And the next one is storytelling. Whose stories need to be told? Once we start asking questions, we have to think about whose voices are part of that conversation. So we're bringing in an idea of storytelling. Networking. How can we connect to each other to do that, to do this work, to tell these stories, to inquire together? Imagination, to ask what kind of future do we want to build together? And then finally, advocacy. How do we get there? And so we see these are literacy. We see them as literacy grounded in the field of literacy, but not in those little boxes that we talked about earlier, not just in literacy, like in English classrooms. This is something that we believe that every teacher at every grade level, every subject area could be embracing these 5 commitments as the foundational kind of guiding ethos of their practice in order to get to this place of thinking about the kind of world that their students can build with them and with the communities around them toward the world that they deserve and the world that we need. It's a reminder that oftentimes, for example, in English language arts, I'm observing a lot of student teachers right now. A lot of my students are becoming teachers and I'm watching their practice, which is really, really rewarding. But it's interesting that we're still breaking out of the idea that in our discipline, in particular in English, there's this idea that every unit or every year is about maybe getting through a certain canon, getting through certain books. Like now I'm on my Hamlet unit. And what would it mean to take those kinds of disciplinary bounds away and instead have units and years that are grounded around these 5 commitments? Because then any subject, any knowledge, and any skills can be integrated into this kind of framework to get to that idea that we are all civics teachers. And it's not about giving folks one more thing to do, like finding civics and putting it on top of what you already do. It's about articulating a purpose for the work that is inherently grounded in these commitments, through which everything else can have a stronger purpose. And we turn a lot to speculative art and fiction for that, which Antero can pick up on.
Yeah, I think I hope that teachers listening to this are already engaging with imagination and advocacy as examples, right, of this in their classrooms now, that these aren't bound to just English classrooms. And hopefully part of why you're a teacher today is you are excited by these kinds of topics. And, you know, if those are things that you are aspiring to, you want your classrooms to be more imaginative or to interrogate and engage in more forms of inquiry, we offer particular kinds of practices in this book that might be helpful. But really, this is a call for you to kind of do the things that you were hoping and dreaming about in your classroom. Maybe back when you were a pre-service teacher and really excited before the drudgery of maybe whatever kinds of district challenges you're facing. But this idea of world building really comes out of particular kinds of aesthetic traditions, as Nicole was pointing to. And so, I want to name, right, Afrofuturism, Latinx futurism as kind of really big driving forces for how Nicole and I were thinking about this. We ground our vision of what world building can look like in Black and feminist traditions. And, the work of Octavia Butler obviously was like very foundational to this work. It's not surprising that the ideas of change for this were coming out of the same time that we're going through the massive upheaval of the global pandemic. And so thinking through, the lessons of the parable of the sower that reflects a startlingly crisp vision of the present in that series of books, right, is telling, right, and definitely informed our thinking. We also think of there's scholarship that's driven out of the Zapatista idea or notion of the pluriverse, right, and this idea that one world might contain many worlds. And I think something that's particularly useful around this idea is, because of the awful mass adoption of the multiverse across various Hollywood films and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right, we're very familiar with this idea that there's many universes out there, right? And I think if we take this kind of pluriversal or multiversal idea, we know that we can create multiple kinds of realities that our students can live through, and we can better this world by making new worlds within it, right? And that is a kind of principle we want to talk to. It is lofty, right? But if we know that we are birthing a new world out of this one, right, then our classrooms become the tools, the space where we sharpen our tools and kind of do the building and kind of create and design alongside young people. And that is a serious vision that we try to push forward in this book.
Great, thank you. While we're talking to our colleagues at the Writing Project and thinking about teachers who teach writing across grade levels, across disciplines, really thinking about, there's a focus in this book around what youth are creating, right? And the voices of youth and the leadership of youth, the expertise actually of youth, and the ways they can also lead us in this visioning and this work. So to me, it really felt like a sort of writing project kind of focus through it. And I was wondering if we could sort of talk more explicitly about the ways that the teaching of writing can be threaded throughout all this world building process.
Yeah, I think there's many of the projects in this book wouldn't happen for us without the influence of the Writing Project. So I mean, that's very close to our hearts, and I think the Writing Project network is we've talked about this, very far advanced and already thinking about these ideas, and we're just like honored to be able to keep finding new ways to articulate them and work with them. And I feel like for writing in particular, as a vehicle for building new worlds, I think it really speaks back to this idea of what is often termed civic literacy. Sometimes there's this idea that there's this kind of directionality, that one thing has to happen before the other, that somehow we write or we read or we listen or we speak, we use our literacy skills, and that somehow that's gained in like a vacuum or in some kind of pure form. And then we apply those literacy skills to doing something civically, like writing a letter or going to a protest or speaking to our representatives. There's this idea that literacy comes first, civics comes second, one comes out of the other. And what the Writing Project knows, and what we were trying to kind of break down, is this idea that the directionality doesn't work that way. We construct our worlds through literacy. We are literally acting upon the world. We are beginning to build the world to come in the very process and the dialectic of writing itself. And that's a key. And that's not an abdication of then, like, because there's this idea that somehow civics can be everywhere. Does that mean that it's nowhere? And that's not the case, because of the speculative theory that Antero was talking about, this idea that we're not talking about building a new world in some kind of distant future that we can just kind of put off or treat as some kind of like idealized vision. This is literally, we are like, that's the urgency and the nature of the fact that we are choosing to we are building new possible worlds every time we engage in an active literacy, and that these are civic actions, and that the more we can be conscious of that and cultivate that, the more that we can take control over our practice as being explicitly civic, as opposed to kind of like just kind of having it hover in the background, or just having some like general implicit values that we never truly make clear. All of us that teach know that it's an act of contradictions. We're constantly contradicting ourselves, but the more that we can be explicit and more that we can be open about our ethical commitments and write our ways into those, we can actually like start to uncover those and work through them, which is going to be the process of world building. So I'll throw that over to you.
I'll just briefly add that I think the kinds of writing that happens across subject areas is also, I think, such a huge opportunity here. So, or maybe the kinds of writing that don't count in classrooms also, right? So if we think about, I don't want to have a cell phone conversation today, like it's probably not particularly useful, but if we think about the ways that young people are on things like social media today, and the ways that this is oftentimes pilloried as a bad thing that's happening to kids. That probably is, who knows? But our students today are reading and writing much more than probably any other age in human development, right? Just in terms of the amount of time that they spend recreationally consuming and creating media means that we are in a space where students as writers is such a foundational part of what is such a foundational identity that the young people already have that's just oftentimes not acknowledged in schools. And so if we're serious about imagining these new worlds, I think it's about incorporating the kinds of powerful skills that young people already bring in. And we see this kind of ingenuity in some of the case studies, right? We can see the young people that Nicole's working with through the Urban Debate League and the ways that they use writing and the ways that they communicate that push beyond the boundaries of what traditional debate might look like. And I just want to name that what counts as writing in your own classroom feels like maybe a kind of reflection that we should be having.
Yeah, and just to kind of come back to that idea around the league as an example. So there's 4 different communities. I hope I'm right about that. 4 different communities that we talk about.
About 4, yeah.
You know, give or take, that are all like that we've been lucky enough to be part of over the past 15 years. And that includes, and we purposely wanted them to range in different kinds of learning spaces, because the idea, of course, is that none of this is restricted to any one classroom space. So there is a project that is happening in English classrooms with National Writing Project teachers called the 3D or Digital Democratic Dialogue Project that we write about. There's also a youth participatory action research collective that was kind of a hybrid space that we write about. There's a citizen science kind of like Black Cloud gaming collective that kind of also straddled school and out of school space. And then there's the debate league that I've been working with middle school students. And I think that one I like to hold on to because I think there's something there that can help, especially English teachers, or to kind of understand what it means when we talk about how writing itself is a civic act. And that is because many of us are familiar with this kind of the routines of debate in middle and high school. There's this idea of a policy debate. A resolution is put out. There's a pro side and a con side. Students debate, and they often have to switch those sides. And the idea is that they will learn argumentation, which can be a civic skill for the future, by doing this kind of simulation. And what the students in this particular debate league did, these are students in New York City that work with a colleague of mine, Principal Ben Honoraff. There's a resolution about immigration, which is pretty typical for many of the policy debate resolutions. And this resolution was about whether or not the US should restrict immigration to the country. And the students that in the school that were considering this resolution were immigrants themselves, or the children of immigrants. And something did not sit right when thinking about the world that they are living in and the world that we want to build. Something did not sit right about the idea of just kind of arguing both sides, or this idea of both sidesism as being the foundation of civic learning. There's some kind of ethical commitment that was upsetting to them. And so instead of withdrawing from the activity, they leaned into writing as a way to change this activity, literally change the rules of the game. And they challenged the very premise of the resolution during debate rounds with other young people, and invited their supposed opponents and the judges to actually join them in the creation of a new public pedagogy, or a new way of looking at debate. And this could literally happen. Obviously some judges voted them down, and we use that as conversation about the world as it is and the world as it could be. But it was a moment of literacy, literally helping us to break free of the constraints about what we think is possible in something as simple as an academic activity. And that is a very powerful, that's a powerful civic move to show young people that not only do the things we see around them in school not have to be this way, but we could also then, there are many other things that don't have to be this way either. And so we kind of use these stories to show on the ground what this looks like, because again, like Antero said, it can sound very lofty sometimes. It could sound very abstract, but literally there are things in each of our disciplines or any of our contexts that we could be questioning and breaking down like that. And students are ready and eager for that kind of opportunity.
I'm glad you shared that story, because I think it's a really powerful vignette. All the cases that you include are very powerful. And that one, they're middle school kids, so they're younger. And what I noticed was they were debating, like, wait, what should, like they themselves had questions about what they were doing, and then moved forward with it and discovered, actually, this is really important for me and my family and my relationship to this conversation, and my contribution. So it is really, it's powerful, and you can really feel all the dimensions that are being thought through in that case. So thank you. And I was telling you both that this weekend I had an opportunity. I was running a workshop at the mid-career program at Penn. And these are folks getting their EDD who are teachers and school principals and superintendents. And we all read your book together. I also invited that group I said, I'm going to talk to Nicole and Antero on Tuesday. And if you have any questions, I could bring them to them. So I figured that was what you were inviting with your book. So that I took that invitation seriously. And, as I said, it was a group of diverse folks in terms of their roles in schools. So they kind of came at it in different ways. Some of the more like administrators were asking about the design of schools, like thinking about like if sort of acknowledging how schools are designed in this sort of one way that it is counter and is sort of the world we are now, right? How do school leaders, find places to help shift things, and how do they support shift towards this vision? And then some of the teachers in the room were wondering about how this is really important work, and it's a lot, right? You guys recognize it's a lot too, right? Like it's we have to support each other as teachers. We have to really, how do we do that? How do we build spaces where we as teachers can collegially support each other in moving in this direction, right? And then another one of the teachers has been thinking about his students, and actually he's been working with his kids to think about your civic critical empathy framework, Nicole. And so he wants to have the kids think about this world building framework now. And he's like, what would you guys give the kids? Like, how would you engage them in this, having this conversation? Like, this is what we're trying to do together. How would you engage them in that? And then there's also this conversation of practicing imagination, just this acknowledgement of like, oh, how do we do that? Even like from wherever our role is, how do we start to do that? So I know that, those are a lot of questions, and the book has a lot of this like pieces in there that could help people around all of these. But anyway, I was just curious what your thoughts are about, if you had any response to any of those questions and suggestions or places in the book for them to look.
It's a real laundry list of.
It is a laundry list. I know. Sorry.
That's amazing.
We can tackle all of these, right? This is rapid. I guess I'll say, I think like maybe a theme across all of these is the how do I get started feels like a kind of thing, right? And for the first question of, if the structures are in place that are adversarial to the kinds of freedom dreaming that I want to do, what might I do, right? Like, I'm not going to bring a sledgehammer and dismantle the walls of school yet. And so, across all of these questions of what should I do, part of me wants to say, and Nicole, I'm curious what you think, but part of me wants to say, I don't know your community or your students. I'm kind of speaking broadly to all teachers. Like, part of this is about knowing the spaces we're in. And much of the book offers resources on how you get started with this. So this isn't just like I don't know you, sorry, I can't help you. This is more of in order to think of like, how do I get started? You need to think of like where maybe the questions are, instead of what should I do, it's, who are we or who am I, right? So thinking about who am I and who are the community that I'm a part of. So doing some exploratory practices around this, doing some inventory, some asset mapping of the kinds of texts that are available to you, the kinds of resources that are around you, the kind of expertise that's seated in your room and in your community. And from there, really thinking through, then you get to the kinds of questions, what might we do, right? What might we do as a community? What might we engage? What might we explore? What might we push upon? And those same kinds of activities I think happen in classrooms are the same kinds of activities I think administrators need to be thinking about of, if these structures are in place in a way that are about carcerality and discipline, right? If we think about kinds of tardy or absent policies that might exist, or the acceptance of late work in a school setting, or bell schedules, right? If those are primarily to be gotcha and to teach forms of punitive reflection on if young people are going to listen to adult power, right? Like, what kind of society are we constructing? And if that's the case, how might we critique and imagine other kinds of possibilities is maybe a starting place around all of this. Nicole, I don't know if you want to pick a particular question or jump in there.
Yeah, I think that, especially when I think about school leaders, we are teachers at heart, so I think I'll tell all the time about what we ask teachers to do, and that, like we said, we know this is not easy. We know that it's especially not easy for certain teachers in certain school districts right now. So we are very attuned to the idea that it is not okay for individual teachers to have to bear the weight of this alone. We really need all of us. This is why we need a movement in public education to kind of reject the narrowing, reject the kind of move towards banning these conversations, banning particular books, so that folks don't have to work on their own. And this also includes leaders, right? We can't ask teachers to be doing this work if leaders are adhering to the same old metrics. So the question I have for school leaders are, what are the metrics of the world to come? How do you measure a world that you're moving toward a world to come? And that is a tough question. I think we are it really calls into question almost every one of the ways that we organize our school days and our school years and our school buildings. And I encourage folks to lean into the discomfort that comes from from imagining that together. Take a PD and throw out feel that discomfort of not moving forward on a strategic goal and actually thinking about what new goals might be. Lean in. I feel that kind of pressure, and I think it's important to lean into. And then also I'll just tell a quick story. I think that a lot of this, how do we get started, can be reflected a little bit in how we put together one of the communities that we write about in the book, which is the Digital Democratic Dialogue, or 3D project. So we were just, I was thinking about this idea of empathy and civics across school environments, and this is why we don't do this alone, right? I literally was trying to think, how do I start this conversation with a small group of teachers and young people? And I reached out to the networks that I love. I reached out to the National Writing Project, and I just put out a call so that even if we don't have folks in our immediate physical environment that might be ready to share our vision, there are teachers out there that are ready and eager for this work. So I just kind of put out a call for folks that wanted to explore this idea. And a group of 6 teachers came together with Antero and I, and we just got together. And the first step, like we talked about, is not even the what. It's not even the doing the thing yet. It was how can we build a sense of community? And so we did an activity that we write about that, at the time, I didn't think about how foundational it would be to everyone's experiences, but we had a chance to come together as a group. And we did an iceberg activity, which, for teachers out there, if you've ever done this iceberg activity in the beginning of the year with students, it's this idea that 90% of an iceberg lives under the surface of the water. Just like most of our identities are not visible to folks when we walk around every day, 90% of ourselves are maybe not visible. And so we challenged each other to kind of open up and share some of our iceberg, our personal iceberg. What would you not know about me unless you got to know me better? And that experience, which I didn't think of at the time, was when our teachers talked about it later, a really foundational experience to this idea of being able to bring your whole self to this conversation, talk about who am I, who are we, who do we want to be, before we talk about particular lesson plans or unit plans or that kind of work. And I think that I encourage, the guiding questions that we have at the end of each chapter are really meant for folks to come together and grapple with as a first step to this work. And then we engaged in a design cycle, which I also encourage. I think that the process of a design experiment is counter to a lot of the ways we do things in schools and can be really powerful. I didn't come in with a particular project I wanted everyone to do. We built it together. So we thought of a school year. We thought of kind of 3 cycles of working through some different questions that started with community, built towards civic issues, and then moved towards future thinking. And so I think that same cycle that we talk about in the book is a way that teachers can start working on these skills that you talked about in the questions of how do we start imagining? How do we start building empathy? I talk in the empathy book about this idea of pragmatic idealism, which I think is really, really important. If we allow ourselves as teachers to restrict our visions to what the constraints of our context are, every district has their own testing and their own school schedules and a million things that are constraining our practice. If we immediately narrow our vision to fit into the schools as they exist, then we've lost the battle. We need to start with the idealistic vision of what might be possible, dream big, dream in a way that feels impossible with our colleagues. And then we start to see, well, what can we do right now within the constraints that we do have with that vision? Instead of giving it up, let's build with it and be pragmatic about moving through our space, because again, like we talked about earlier, if we believe that every moment, every step that we take, every piece of writing we do is a step toward either building a new world or exceeding to the one that is, then these are all really small moves that are radical acts that are part of that journey.
Great, thank you. Those are wonderful answers, and I think would really support folks in taking some first steps. So thank you. And we're getting to the end here. So I wanted to sort of give you a chance to talk about anything else you want to say that people can find in this book. This book is a rich resource, and I have to say, as a member of a professional network of teachers, I want to read it more with my colleagues. So that's also a place that I'd like to engage more, and really, like I said, I felt like those case studies were really powerful places to start discussions. And then I know this is being recorded in late October, so NCTE is coming up in Columbus, Ohio. And so that'll be a chance for some of our colleagues to connect with you in person. So so maybe you can talk about sort of some of the resources that you have available and what might be coming up at NCTE and how you'd like people to engage with all of that.
Well, perhaps our future president of NCTE wants to start us off.
I'll briefly say that I think I'm going to stick with the book for a second and say that each of the commitments in the book has ways to start small, right? If these feel difficult, and move up to the kind of, big vision stuff. And, we encourage you to kind of slowly build up expertise across all these commitments, but knowing that this might feel hard and uncomfortable, and that there are affective dimensions to all of this, that this is difficult work. And so I'd say that, if one chapter feels hard, jump to a different chapter, right? They were written in a particular order, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be dictated by the ways our pages go. I guess I'll just say, in terms of NCTE, there's a couple of upcoming events, particularly Friday evening of NCTE. There's a couple of big announcements that we're going to make in a second. And I'll say that the way that Nicole and I have been talking about world building, and the way we've been framing this book, has been around this idea of speculative education and speculative pedagogies. And we've done some, academic writing in this space in addition to this book. And we've, edited a journal issue, and we've edited a recent edited volume on speculative education. And we're going to continue in that space. And so, Nicole, I don't know if you want to talk about some upcoming opportunities around that.
Yeah, I think part of our vision here is not just like writing this stuff. Like, we really are trying to think about what it means to change like our professional organizations, change our academic organizations to like be more collaborative and collective. So we always jump on the opportunity to do things with other folks who are building this new field. So we've got a few things coming up. So we're going to be speaking to the English Language Arts Teacher Educator Elate group at NCTE on Friday, which we're really excited about what this means to create this as the foundation of how we educate future teachers. And after that, we're going to be doing some signings of our new book. And when we do those, we want to open up opportunities for others to get involved. So there's three main ways right now. First, we want to create an ongoing network of any educator that wants to be interested in the intersection of civics and literacy. We're going to have like ongoing webinars throughout the year and ways to keep communicating. It kind of grows out of our 3D project. There's many more teachers that want to be part of a network like this than we currently have resources for. And so we want to help people build it out. So Friday night on November 17th from 6:30 to 8, there's going to be a little reception for like a networking opportunity to build community. So we encourage people to come to that. And even if you're not at NCTE, there's two major opportunities to write with us. So there's a special issue of the journal that NCTE sponsors, the Research and the Teaching of English. We're going to have a special issue coming out, which we can circulate the call through the network, and it's on our social media as well, where we want people to help build this field about like rejecting civics as a standalone discipline and showing that literacy is kind of foundational. So we want folks to write with us, and so we want folks to like reach out to us with ideas. And then in addition to a journal article, which we know can be a little bit academic, we're also going to, for folks that have bigger ideas and are ready to move to an even bigger canvas, we're going to be launching a book series with Teachers College Press. We're interested in folks that want to write with community members, write with youth, write with each other. Tell us about the work that you're doing to build new worlds through your work. And we're going to be hosting some book incubators in the future for folks that want to know what it means to write a book prospectus what it means to do this kind of genre writing and build toward a larger project. So that's in addition to the fact that we still host the Speculative Education Conference every year, which will always be.
Yeah, we're going to still do it.
Forgot about that. Got to start planning that, which will come up in the spring.
Which
always
we can use help with. Help us.
Yeah, help us build that. Like always online, always free, always a space to kind of move beyond the bounds of what academia or even K-12 or university education means. It's a space Christina has come before. We draw together, we talk to artists, we talk to authors, we dream together, we imagine together. And we're always open to I think our careers have really turned in a way towards trying to create these kinds of interactive spaces. And we're excited to kind of see where everyone takes this work. It's really exciting.
Great. Thank you. Oh, those sounds like great opportunities. And yeah, those creative spaces that you all have been building online, and I love that there's these opportunities to write together too coming up. So thank you so much. Why don't we just close with some final thoughts? I'm not sure I have like a profound final thought. I'm very thankful for your book. I'm very thankful for the opportunity it feels very, I guess, like I said, like I took it in the class, like, here's an opportunity for us to work on something together. It felt like it was something I could engage immediately with folks, and that was the invitation, and that was the opportunity. It's the opportunity of it. And so I was really glad to be able to do that with a group of people, even just this weekend. So I'm looking forward to more. And yeah, any other good for the order thoughts before we sign off here? Just thank you both so much for making and taking the time to be here.
I just say, take care of yourself. This is hard, as Nicole started us off. These are hard times, and we're asking for big changes alongside our students, but also that work happens because we're able to take care of ourselves and our community of other teachers. I'd say make sure you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, this can definitely feel despairing at times, but I think where I find solace in this work, if I could spend time being in a struggle like this and being able to do it alongside folks like Antero who are friends, I feel like that's the work, right? Like that's the work we get to be engaged in. That's the struggle that helps me when I'm feeling that can be really heavy and too much. And we said this in another conversation, this idea about we could start small, but we need to start now. Like at the same time that we hold how difficult this is, and we hold that we have those feelings, and this is not a happy-go-lucky vision of the future. This is one that's going to be really birthed out of struggle, but that we don't have our students do not have. We don't have time to waste. We don't need to be feeling like we have to turn our lives upside down, but we do need to start now. This is urgent work, and we it's the work of our careers and hopefully the work of our time.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you both for this offering and for being here on NWP Radio. So I'll just close out by saying this has been an NWP Radio broadcast of the National Writing Project. You can follow NWP Radio on the podcast near you, at YouTube, and also in our NWP Teacher Studio at studio.nwp.org, where we invite all educators to come and engage in conversations and connect with others about writing, the teaching and writing, and to find colleagueship and support and engage around these critical issues. So thank you all for joining us today. Bye-bye.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.